Hello there my dear friends, and welcome back to another Star Wars video. It is I coming at you once again, your favourite galactic hostess, Star Wars Meg, and today we have some pretty crazy Star Wars news. It's honestly an update I've been anticipating for a very long time. As Palpatine once said, I've waited a long time for this moment, my little green friend. Unless you're a Yoda species, you're not my little green friends, you are my dear friends, and I welcome you to my channel if you are new. But this update is pretty darn crazy. Ever since Darth Plagueis made his brief appearance in The Acolyte, I wondered, what would James Luceno think? The author of what is arguably the best ever written Star Wars Legends novel. Well, a couple of weeks ago, he finally shared his public opinion on The Acolyte. Now I have to say, I found his comments both insightful and surprising. He didn't just talk about Leslye Headland and The Acolyte, he also shares some insights into what it's like being an author who worked on a character to then see them flourish or appear in something else. And he talks about a major author's pitfall, which you have to avoid. So, just to set the scene, as we know, Darth Plagueis appeared for 2 seconds near the end of the show. He appeared behind a rock, watching Osha and Chimera. And despite the allusions to the fact that maybe Plagueis is the master, watching both The Apprentice and The Acolyte, the visual guide confirms Darth Plagueis had nothing to do with them. The reason he was interested is he sensed them in the Force, because Chimera is an imposter, he's not a genuine Sith. And so I suppose we can deduce if they had made a season 2, we might have seen Plagueis fighting Chimera, confronting him and saying, look, you think you're a Sith, you're not. You're not part of the rule of 2, who are you and what do you want? The eventual Master of Palpatine would have had a bigger role in the second season, but like I say, for the meantime, a follow-up is not going to happen. Disney and Lucasfilm have commented, and they both said no. So James Luceno was asked about all of this. Now his answer is quite simple and to the point. He begins by confirming that he has watched the show, he knows all about it, and it seems as though he's very aware of the controversial nature of it. But the first thing he notes is he wasn't expecting Plagueis to appear whatsoever. He was really surprised. He says he didn't see the show going in that direction, but it was a pleasant surprise, because he says, quote, I was saddened to hear that Leslye Headland didn't get another season, because she might have been able to go deeper into the dark side. I think there's a part of him which I guess we can all relate to some extent, where he was just very curious about what Disney and Lucasfilm were going to do next. But I've always said, if they're going to do a second season at some point, it might be nice to get some fresh blood in, and that has been my standard response whenever someone brings up the possibility of a second season. But I also realize now, based on the most recent revelations, and go check out my last video for that, it might not even matter. There's too much studio overreach. But I think James is curious because in many ways, ever since the expanded universe was relegated to Legends, his book no longer counts as part of the Disney Star Wars canon. Plagueis as a character of course is canon from Revenge of the Sith. I think he was mentioned a few times in some reference books. The Acolyte was his first official on-screen appearance. Now the most interesting part of his response is what he says next. Luceno talks about how many of his fellow authors get way too attached and way too possessive of the characters they write, especially if it's a character that they themselves have created. In the case of Luceno, he isn't the creator of Darth Plagueis. It's a George Lucas character from Revenge of the Sith. But he was the first to really flesh the character out, because for a long time there were fan debates. Did Darth Plagueis really exist, or was it just a manufactured story by Palpatine to lure Anakin closer to the dark side? Was it just a ruse? A made-up story to make Anakin think there was a way to save Padme? Of course, Palpatine didn't know Plagueis' secrets, but the character, his master, definitely existed, and Palpatine did kill him in his sleep. And I urge you guys to go read this book. It is a masterclass of writing evil. But James says that while he adores the character of Plagueis, he doesn't feel like he owns him. He's kept a distance between him and his work. So I suppose he's fine with others writing the character their own way. And he says the reason he's fine with it is they've already retconned so much of his other Star Wars work, if you think of books like Labyrinth of Evil, for example. but he says one of the problems with many of his fellow authors is they shoot themselves in the foot. They get way too close to those characters, and so they really miss the point that they've been commissioned to write a story for a greater franchise. They don't own the character. Other writers can do what they want with them if Lucasfilm decides it's time to make a new story. No character belongs to any author. It's all under Lucasfilm. No matter how much they've written about them, even if they were the creator of said character, they don't own them. And too often, he says, they are never invited back to make more Star Wars stories, especially in cases where the author badmouths Lucasfilm. They're not going to come back. Luceno is not willing to do that. He was then asked if he'd ever want to return to help with a follow-up to the Acolyte. If Lucasfilm were ever to return to the character of Plagueis, would he want to contribute? And he responded with, quote, "Probably not," before specifying there is very rarely an overlap between Star Wars authors and Star Wars screenwriters. One of the most prominent exceptions to this rule is Timothy Zahn, when he consulted on Rebels, and to an extent, on Ahsoka. But we know Zahn is frustrated that Dave Filoni just won't answer the phone, and he doesn't seem to have been asked for his input on Season 2, even though Zahn says he knows a lot about where Dave is going, and he's one of those authors who's tried to stay in Lucasfilm's good books. But returning to Luceno, one topic he was very keen to discuss though was Andor Season 2. I think it's his favourite show, and it makes sense he's an Andor and Rogue One fan because he wrote the amazing canon novel Catalyst, another book I strongly recommend. And one final point about Darth Plagueis. This is a bit earlier in the interview, but James reveals that there was one concept that Lucasfilm shut down, something he wanted to include in his novel where they said no, and he says he was told directly to his face he doesn't understand the Sith. What he wanted to do was make Darth Plagueis a more grey character. He didn't like that the Sith was so black and white, just pure evil and passion driven. He wanted there to be a bit more nuance, but they said no, that's not the Sith. And this goes back to an age-old discussion, at least in our fandom, of can a grey Jedi or grey dark side user really exist? It depends on the interpretation of the Force you want to go with. If you're a George Lucas purist, the answer is no. The light side in being a Jedi is balance in and of itself. Then there is Dave Filoni, who's a bit more nuanced. His core notion of the Force borrows from Lucas that light is still good, but awareness of darkness can be part of that wisdom. And for examples of this, look at characters like Bendu, someone who calls himself the one in the middle, or even the likes of Qui-Gon or Mace Windu in the expanded universe. The idea of natural balance, like I say with the Bendu in Star Wars Rebels, or even the Clone Wars Mortis arc. Ahsoka is set to expand on these ideas. Then there's the Colin Trevorrow approach, who in his version of Episode 9 was also going to interpret being grey as true balance in the Force. Then there's Rian Johnson, who in The Last Jedi leaned into yin-yang philosophy. Balance isn't just about light side domination, it's about wholeness, coexistence, and renewal. And according to Luke, in Episode 8, the Jedi's failure was in thinking they owned the light. It's an arrogant, limited view on the Force. It's more of a Taoist approach, and maybe it shares some similarity with Grey Jedi thinking, but it's still rather distinct. Luceno wanted to explore this with the philosophy of Plagueis, but Lucasfilm told him no. So those, my friends, are some of the big reveals from this interview. Share your thoughts in the comments down below.